Hey guys. Okay, so what we're going to do today is talk just very briefly about this article that I included onto the Prejudice Moodle section. And the reason why I wanted to include this was because this is a very interesting perspective. And I want us to think about sort of how this relates to current times and today. So what I've done here is this is a Washington Post article. And so, this isn't what I would consider a research article at all. This is just something that I had come across that I thought explained it in a really interesting way. But it spurred what spurred the article was this poll that was reported from Historical Opinion, which is a Twitter page that goes back through a lot of different historical documents and then reports on some things that are found from then. And so in 1938, in July 1938, before the United States was involved in World War II, there was a poll that was run that asked the American people about their attitudes towards refugees during the war. Now, one of the polls was asking about German, Austrian, and other refugees, and then the other question was about children. So what I want to the reason why I want to really shed light on this is because many of us learn in history class and social studies, we learn about wars, we learn about, things that happen that are terrible. For example, many of you may have read the Diary of Anne Frank, might have seen movies like Schindler's List that covered the atrocities that happened during World War II, and learned about the Holocaust. So what I often find is that students will say things like, oh my goodness, if I was alive in the 1930s and 40s and I, had the means, I would definitely hide Jewish people. I would try to help, and I would, that's just awful. I can't believe that they had to go through that. I can't believe the Holocaust happened. And it's really, when you read and learn about it, it's really just awful. And you say, how on earth, can we repeat that? There's no way. We've learned our lesson as human beings. And what we find is that we keep making these same mistakes over and over again, where, there's war and, atrocities and people die, people are tortured, and it happens over and over and over again. And one thing that you've learned through social psychology in this class is that human nature is a very interesting thing. And, we act differently when we're with people, we act differently when we have power, we act differently when we don't have power, and there's a lot of things at play here. And social psychologists have been studying these sorts of things for many, many years. So that's sort of a precursor to what I'm about to go into now, because when I teach this in class, I think that sometimes what happens is that people will sometimes get defensive, and this is not meant to attack anybody. This is not meant to, bring out anybody's opinions. What's important here is that we understand why this occurs. So when we look at this poll, this was asking, what is your attitude towards allowing German, Austrian, and other political refugees to come into the United States? And as you can see, 67.4% reported that, considering the conditions, the current conditions, the state of things, we should keep them out. 9.5% said that they didn't know. 18.2% said, sure, we can allow them to come in, but don't allow an increase in immigration quotas, as in, we're only allowing X amount of people become citizens or come into the country, and we shouldn't allow any exception to increase that value, even though we're bringing more people in. And then 4.9% actually said, yes, we should encourage them to come, even if that means that more immigration occurs and the quotas are raised, because there was a cap on how many people could immigrate. emigrate to the United States. So here we have a very large portion of people saying, over half saying, no, absolutely not. And we think of today of, of our Americans' views of Jewish people, of German people, of Austrian people, and there's not really a lot of animosity. It's just, okay, they're who they are. There's no sort of hate. There's no they're not people that we see, okay, we dislike. Now, if we go down, and this is an interesting, piece, this is an interesting perspective. And of course, when we read anything online that's opinion pieces, we always have to, keep in mind that, of course, there's going to be bias. And no matter what news outlet, no matter what information outlet, we have to consider there's going to be bias. So, keep that in mind. And also any poll that we have to consider bias, because remember, this is 1938, 1939. Who are they asking? Are they going on the street? Are they asking through the paper? If they're asking through the paper, then that means that only people that can afford to have a subscription can answer. There's a lot of bias that can go into these polls. So I want you to keep that in mind. So this is it's not like every single person in the United States is polled and this is the answer. This is probably a biased poll, but we do have to keep this in mind that many people had this same perspective in the 1930s and 40s. So in January 20th, 1939, another poll, this one was, it has been proposed to bring to this country 10,000 refugee children from Germany, most of them Jewish, to be taken care of in American homes. Should the government permit these children to commit? 10,000 refugee children. 30% said yes, over half, 61% said no, and 9% had no opinion. Now, there is a caveat here, and it explains about the polling period. There was another question that was almost identical but didn't actually say Jewish, and the support for accepting refugees was slightly lower when the word Jewish was used. So again, they were more open. Americans were more open to bringing in refugees, less supportive of bringing in Jewish refugees. And so, when we think about the impact this has today, if you ask your grandparents, great-grandparents about, if they were alive or when they were alive during World War II, depending on how old they are, you can ask them what is their opinion on Japanese people. And what you'll find is that if they were alive and remember that time period, Japanese individuals were considered a people that were dangerous. And those, there was a camp in the United States that Japanese people had to go to during this time because they were feared to be so dangerous, and they were feared to be terrorists. And so the same thing with Jewish refugees. Refugees of World War II, the fear was that they were secret Nazis, that you bring over these refugees and they're going to infiltrate the United States, and then they're going to, start killing people and start recruiting people, and that all of those refugees are secret Nazis and they're going to kill us all. And so this is reflected on the opinion today of the Syrian refugees. During then, Syria wasn't, that wasn't a hated area as it is now. If you look, a lot of Americans have very strong opinions and consider all Syrians to be terrorists, and that, they're going to come here as refugees and they're going to recruit and they're going to kill all of our people. And if you look at that, it's really reflected in every single war instance. There's a group of people that are the enemies, and those are the ones that we're taught to hate, we're taught to dislike. Every generation has a group of people who they are prejudiced against. And if you read through the material and read through look at the lectures and read the book, what you'll find is that people are naturally, and I'm not saying this is a good thing or bad thing, our brains work in such a way that we categorize people. We categorize them as good, we categorize them as bad, we categorize them as in-group versus out-group. Do we connect with them? Do we not? How alike are they? We'll group people perhaps of color together. We might group minorities together. If we're white, if we're minority, we might group white people together and say, they're all the same. And so what ends up happening, though, is that we naturally do this. We do this with every part of language. We do this with every part, this organization. This is sort of, cognitive psychology, where we look at, the development of language. And we look at, for example, how children learn things. They learn to distinguish between a cow and a horse. They learn to distinguish between a dog and a cat. Well, they group together dogs, group together cats. They group together animals, and then they learn to more specifically categorize within that. And so we do the same thing with people. And that can breed prejudice. That can breed discrimination, because we tend to do this. And the more we learn about our own categorizations, then we can actually control that and say, no, not all of these individuals are alike, or not all of these are whatever. And we can also learn which of those groups that we don't really connect with. And why is it that we don't connect with them? Is it because, we've grown up with a family that said, these are the people that we don't like? And somebody might not have actually come out and said that in your family. But the point is that this is what we're taught. We're taught what groups we should stay away from, we should be scared of, we should hate, we should dislike, we should be cautious of. And so that part is taught. Who we are against is taught. And as you can see in these examples of war and these examples of these polls, in the 30s and 40s, Jewish people did not have a very good reputation, because of what was happening in Germany, in Austria. And, Japanese had a terrible reputation, obviously, because of things like bombing of Pearl Harbor. And, the wars will, of course, play into that. Media plays into that. Social media plays into that. Our families play into that. Society plays into that. There's so much involved here. There's so much that goes into it. But what I want you to take away from this is that, of course, our categorization of people is natural and is something that our brain does. But what and whom we hate, or whom we dislike, or whom we stay away from, or whom we don't connect with, often is taught. And that is something that we learn from people around us, whether it's family, friends, society, social media, whatever it may be. So I just want to, kind of really talk you through this article. And if you have any questions, please make sure to send me an email. I'm happy to answer them. But I really want you to gain perspective. This is less about, memorize this material, and more about gaining perspective about discrimination, about prejudice, and about this, about what society does. So if you have any questions, please make sure to send me an email, and hope you have a great rest of your day.